choice right now, between fear and love. It's just a rock.
Out of the dark night of ignorance and into the shining light of truth.
Expounding reality.
A population of citizens capable of critical thinking.
We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are.
There's a level of reality where everything dissolves into an ocean of energy.
We empower our experience by insisting on our authenticity.
That's very profound. Very.
Expanding reality.
Welcome to Expanding Reality. I am your host, Brandon Thomas. On this very, very special episode, guys, Dr. Rick Strassman comes by to talk about his new book, The Psychedelic Handbook, a practical guide to psilocybin, LSD, ketamine, MDMA, and DMT and ayahuasca. Fascinating read, guys. This is awesome. Dr. Rick Strassman, of course, in 2012 wrote the breakthrough book, DMT, The Spirit Molecule, and has been absolutely crushing it in the psychedelics game ever since. So on this episode, guys, we talk about, of course, set and setting, why he wrote the book, what are psychedelics and how effective are they, his thoughts on the increased popularity and availability of psychedelics, some of the dangers, of course, medieval metaphysics, which is awesome. You guys are going to love it. Also, he finds salvia as weird as shit as I do, which I think is absolutely awesome. We also cover, of course, food of the gods, the stoned ape theory, and all sorts of crazy cool stuff, guys. So all the ways to find him, of course, are going to be located down in the show notes. Make sure that you check that out. While y'all are down there as well, check out expandingrealitypodcast.com. That is our website. It is our central hub for everything. That's where links to all the socials go, merchandise, all that cool stuff. Merch is changing also, guys. I announced on the last show. So if you got something out there that you like, go ahead and snatch it up, or it's all changing anyway, so go ahead and snatch it up if there's something that you like on there. Also, while you're down in the show notes, if you are just like, man, this show is incredible, how do I support, how do I become more involved, become an expansive insider. That is where all the bonus stuff is, the panel shows, the cool collaborations, all the cool stuff, guys, is happening over there, and it is a wonderful way to support the show. As well, if you just want to support without signing up to become an expansive insider, there is a link in the show notes titled Support the Mission. That's the best way to do that. Every little bit helps, and thank you guys so much for participating in Value Exchange. It just lights me up to no other, so thank y'all so much. Also, an announcement to make really quick, super exciting. Go check out the link in the show notes titled Secret Space UFOs. That is the brand new documentary by Darcy Weir, amazing filmmaker. He crushed it with this one. I mean, absolutely crushed it. It's so cool to watch Darcy grow as a filmmaker, but also not only is Richard Dolan in this bad boy, but your boy right here is in this bad boy. So at the end of the video version of this episode right here, I'll play the trailer in full. So check the show notes for the video version of this, and that's how you can watch the trailer. Also, it's over there on Amazon, so y'all go check it out. It's called Secret Space UFOs, NASA's First Missions. This was a blast to do, and Darcy, thank you so much, man. Really, you crushed it on this one, dude, so well done. All right, guys, so let's get to this incredibly cool conversation with Dr. Rick Strassman. Welcoming to the show, we have Dr. Rick Strassman, the great and powerful. Man, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on today.
Outstanding, of course. How can I not? Your 2012 book, DMT, The Spirit Molecule, I digested that thing, absolutely loved it, fellow psychonaut myself. And so to hear about how just the process to get this passed, because it's a scheduled one, was insane. And so I'm grateful you detailed it in the book, and then as well as just all the experiences that folks had. I think this is fascinating, man. So you are just crushing it at psychedelic research. Your new book, The Psychedelic Handbook, will of course be located down in the show notes, guys. Definitely check this thing out. A practical guide to psilocybin, LSD, ketamine, MDMA, and DMT and ayahuasca. What made you want to write this bad boy? It's awesome. Love it, by the way.
Thanks. Well, it seemed like a good time for a little textbook that packs as much information as possible into an accessible, reader-friendly, but authoritative guidebook to learning about psychedelics, what they are, how they work, what they do, what they don't do, the different drugs themselves. I include I include ibogaine in there, as well as mescaline and 5-methoxy-DMT, and also salvia, but there were only, so many words we could put in the subtitle. So the longest chapter in the book is how to trip, how to get yourself ready and make sure everything's going to go well. And I talk about the law and microdosing. There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of things being said, that kind of promote a panacea-like approach to psychedelics and minimize potential adverse effects. And I wanted to kind of balance the presentation by emphasizing how powerful these drugs are and how you need to think clearly about taking them or giving them.
It's a great point. I think it's not pointed out enough. I think a lot of people think, psychedelics, this is going to be fun. But I mean, things like ayahuasca, that's not a party drug. It's medicine. And so it's just viewed very differently, especially when it comes to the drug culture, I guess, if we want to put it. But psychedelics, in my mind, are in a category all of their own. So what are psychedelics and what do they do from your perspective?
Well, that could be sort of expanded at a number of levels. I mean, subjectively, they affect every aspect of the mind, the human mind, one's emotions, perceptions, visual, auditory, somatic effects, your sense of your body, volitional kind of sense of self, thinking processes and content. So they basically modify every aspect of consciousness, as opposed to, let's say, stimulants, which only affect maybe one or two, or sedatives, but psychedelics affect the whole range. They are, well, if you kind of translate psychedelic, it means mind manifesting or mind disclosing, which I think is the broadest, most generic description of their effects. I think they bring to light or make more meaningful or convey a conviction of the reality sense of what's already in your mind, in your psyche. That's not to say those things in your mind are now conscious, but they do reside there in some form or another. They might be forgotten memories or intellectual associations that you hadn't thought of before, but were potential in your mind. So they accompanying or as a vehicle of that information, that manifestation of your mind, there are visions, voices, loss of body awareness, travel through space, extreme emotions or no emotions at all, or a combination of emotions. So they work biologically on certain receptors in the brain, the serotonin ones. Their effects on the brain kind of are, kind of what you would expect based on subjective experience. There are certain things which are made more conscious. There are new ways of the brain communicating with different centers. We're looking at them, or they have been looked at in a lot of different ways. They can be psychotherapeutic, they can be spiritual, they can be fun. When you ask what is psychedelic, it's a lot of things.
I mean, even breathing techniques can put you in this state. Hot saunas for a while can put you in this state. Near-death experiences can put you in a psychedelic type state. Meditations as well. So there seems to be a few different avenues or roads that will lead you to some extraordinary experiences that, yes, reside in the realm of subjectivity for the most part. You have people that take very similar amounts of things on similar doses, similar body weights. And I know you discovered this in your research, right? That no two trips are identical or even really that similar, really. There's some common elements. But so is that what you found, was just a diversity of experiences?
Well, it seemed to take people, in terms of giving DMT, it seemed to cause similar phenomenological effects, like, the visions were similar, the physical effects were similar, the emotional effects were similar. They were quite strange. I mean, it would be like the psychic equivalent of going to, India for the first time and not having any idea what to expect. But the individual, the meaning of the experiences, the specific symbolism and interactions in that state were specific to the person. For example, a software designer saw the source of zeros and ones, and urban shaman had a death rebirth experience. Someone who with a long-standing interest in the near-death state had a near-death experience. Somebody with an interest in the mystical state had a mystical experience. There were a couple of cases of trauma being healed, either emotionally or physically. So even though the surface features of the DMT experience were quite similar among the volunteers, the specific content and its relationship to that person were unique to that person, which is the reason that I think psychedelic is the most appropriate term. There are other terms for these drugs: mysticomimetic, entheogenic, psychotomimetic, hallucinogenic. But those all emphasize one potential set of outcomes. I think a term which encompasses them all is psychedelic.
Why do you think in your mind that the individual has such subjective, as you said, if they're researching near-death experiences, that's what they have. Anything they're obsessed with, angels and demons, they'll come up with some version of that. Have you been able to reconcile that within yourself?
Well, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the drugs are only, there's nothing other than you that the drugs are working on. So with one set of experiences already under your belt, or an interest in the near-death state, let's say, or an interest in solving a professional problem, for example, those are things that your mind is full of. And the psychedelic makes more meaningful, more true, more real certain ways of looking at those things which are already in your mind. And if there are certain contents of your mind that occupy it a lot of the time, then that's what's going to come up during your trip.
Yeah, it's interesting. It rings the bells of like Dr. Lynn McTaggart's work with the intention studies. What they were intending is what occurred. And so this makes sense when you go on a psychedelic experience, especially with this type of experience. It's pretty wild on any of these, honestly. There's a variety of different ones that you talk about in here, and I love this. So actually, I was just curious for me personally, what's your favorite? Like just one you enjoy the most?
The one I enjoy the most? Well, I don't trip that much these days, but I used to like LSD a lot in my 20s, late teens, early 20s. You need a lot of energy to get through a full LSD trip.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed that. I was young, vigorous, just kind of be out all day. I've liked psilocybin. I went through a stage of really enjoying ayahuasca, drinking it with one of the federally approved Brazilian-based churches out here. I really enjoyed that. I don't have much experience with ketamine, and to be honest, I haven't done smoked DMT that many times. But the first time kind of got me into studying DMT. MDMA, I'm not crazy about. salvia is horrible. At least I found it horrible.
Yes, right? Okay, what are your thoughts on salvia? I thought it was so weird, man. And I'm a psychonaut like you. I used to do a lot of acid. Again, in the 20s is when you do this thing, you know, and MDMA and acid. It's called candy flipping for the kids out there. That was one of my favorite things because it took kind of the harshness off of the LSD, to be honest with you. But you need like 3 days to recover, even in your 20s. So what's up with salvia, man? What were your thoughts?
Well, you know, I think I treat it fairly in the book. It's the shortest chapter in that section. You know, I just describe its pharmacology. It has a unique pharmacology. It stimulates the kappa opioid receptor as opposed to the serotonin one type, the serotonin type 2. But the subjective effects are very unsettling for most people, even though apparently there are people that really like salvia. There's been a couple of studies, one at Harvard, one at Hopkins, and they recruited people that enjoy taking salvia. You know, but it isn't uncommon for people to say, I'm never using that again. Well, it's really disorienting because it completely changes this reality.
Yeah.
You know, things are like, you know, I've got a rug there, my computer's there, there's a lamp there. Things just start to get really strange in your world. And it's, you know, there's a feeling of a catastrophe as well that seems to accompany it. You know, I smoked it in the early 90s when it was the pure you know, substance was discovered to be smokable, as opposed to just, you know, sublingual. So we were some of the earlier experimenters, you know, scouts with that drug, and I way overdosed. I took way too much. And I was lying on the bed, and a hole opened up in the ceiling, and a man 40 feet tall, wearing a brown suit and a brown derby or you know, bowler hat, looked down at me and said, "It's time to go now." And he started to, you know, pull me into his pant leg, starting, you know, mostly with my arm, which was flying off, you know, particles, you know, joining into his pant leg. And I was just terrified. I thought, what the hell is this? My poor wife, well, I was married at the time. That may have contributed to the end of the marriage. I'm not sure. But, I was really kind of out of it for, you know, half hour, 45 minutes. And was pretty unsettled for a few days later.
Yeah, I would say so. And that's a long salvia trip. Yeah, you did take quite a bit. Mine was like 15 minutes, man. And my thing, like you said, it's not like psilocybin or anything like that to where it makes like, you know, things breathe or objects that you're familiar with, stationary things. You're like, yes, the cup is there. Yeah, it's moving and it's doing its thing, but it's there. My experience was like, I pictured the people in the room with me turned immediately into, you know, those posable, faceless figures that people use for art, you know, and they're kind of like posable, but they're just faceless and they're just so that people can figure out how bodies are constructed and draw off of it. Everyone in the room turned into one of those. And then they started folding, like their appendages started folding like pieces of paper. And then I came back to baseline. It was wild, man. And so same thing. I've got one under my belt and that's it. Not to say never again, but it was so shockingly odd. You know? Yeah,
it's this very strange mixture of a hallucinatory state and, you know, this state.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, next question for you then would be, what did you discover writing this book that you were previously unaware of?
The main thing that really struck me was, despite my thinking I was pretty current on all of these, you know, drugs, the theories, the pharmacology around them. Once I really sat down, you know, to write the book, I was amazed at the advances that had taken place the last 2 or 3 years. You know, both within the clinical research world, the political world, the commercial media approach. Yeah, things have really taken off the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting how popular it's gotten. So that was another question I had for you. So with this, just want to know your thoughts on its increased in popularity and availability. What do you think about that?
Well, it is a mixed bag. I mean, there were two schools of thought in the 60s about psychedelic accessibility. Who should take them? Who should be allowed to take them? There was an elitist party, Frank Hurd, Aldous Huxley, and the more egalitarian folks out there like Tim Leary and Ken Kesey, who believed everybody should get stoned, pretty much. And if it weren't for Tim Leary and Ken Kesey, a lot of people would not have taken psychedelic drugs for the good. But at the same time, there were a lot of problems with indiscriminate use and people that weren't well prepared. Emergency room visits, psychiatric hospitalizations, suicides, accidents, those kinds of things. So I think there'll be more people tripping, which will, hopefully overall be a good thing, and an increasing number of casualties, adverse effects. So I think we need to be a little more prepared for adverse effects than we seem to be. There's a tendency to really, glorify potential benefits and to minimize problems. So a more balanced approach will come in handy when those problems, start to emerge and, garner some attention.
It's an interesting perspective. Now, the first time I ever did LSD, I was 18, took 2 hits of liquid acid, never done any psychedelic ever before. And I had a horrible, horrible, horrible trip. One of these famous things of, the puking everywhere, the crying, like very scared, very just shook up. Now, I didn't have anybody to help me out with that. I was pretty on my own with it, but I still found the experience incredibly valuable. So it's this idea of having these horrible experiences. And I think a lot of us can empathize with this, that on the other side of some pretty extreme things in your life, not necessarily even psychedelics, that is when you have your greatest awarenesses and breakthroughs. So on the other side of these crap trips, are some value, So do you think that's accurate, that there's value in all trips, good and bad?
No, I think there are some bad trips that are just, bad. They'll, trigger some major problem or, like an accident or, anxiety that just never goes away, or flashbacks, or, depression that's really hard to treat. But I think it is possible to work through a bad trip. I think you can have a bad trip and, depending on your resources, your personal resources and your social network, you can turn a bad trip into good, like the next day, let's say, or as you're coming down and you're getting, talked down and feel better. But at least, or, for sure, the following days, if you still feel on shaky ground, if you have a way to understand it and to kind of work with it, to metabolize it, and if you have a supportive environment too, you can learn from a bad trip, but I don't think it's automatic that happens.
That's fair.
You need to work on it and have help.
Yeah, and just as you're talking through this, why don't they have a hotline or a service like that to where you can have integration after, to where you can talk about it with somebody?
Well, there is actually the Fireside something or another. It's a 24/7 hotline.
Really? Okay, awesome.
Yeah, it's been around a few years, and they're getting better and better.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you. And then I'll link it down in the show notes so that you guys can check it out. Also, I'm going to be linking your conversation over on Ascension of the Chessman. I'm rocking the shirt today. Thank you, Andre, for hooking us up. And so another question I had for you is, do you think psychedelics are for everybody?
Oh, no. I don't think so. At the same time, I think people who want to try them ought to be able to.
I completely agree with that. I saw up in Canada, isn't it? Now they have a dispensary. I saw Dennis McKenna posted something about that the other day, that they have their first psilocybin dispensary up there. And I thought that was really cool. So do you think that that's where we're going with this, that they're just going to become more accepted and more legal?
Oh man, yeah. To be honest, I hope not. I mean, what if your 10-year-old kid wants to go into a psilocybin dispensary, or he finds somebody who's 20 and says, "Hey man, can you buy me some mushrooms?" I think there needs to be some regulations. And I think there ought to be places where people can trip safely for the reason that they want to trip. So I think just going in, buying mushrooms and saying, see you. I think a lot of people have a good time, but I think it puts other people at risk that wouldn't necessarily need to be at risk if accompanying the accessibility were facilities and facilitators who could supervise people's sessions. It's going on already underground. You've got sitters and the shamanic culture. People facilitate sessions, but to do it above board, legally, have the state certified and all that. There's nothing quite yet going on, although they're working hard in the state of Oregon to get psilocybin centers up and running by January, with a whole state regulatory bureaucracy to hopefully minimize adverse effects at the very least.
Yeah, it's an awesome point. So let me ask you, what are some of the dangers? We touched on these just a little bit. So some of the dangers that we can come across if you're out there imbibing in psychedelics for the first time. Anybody out there's first time user? What's something to look out for?
Well, you need to be in good health, or if you're on any medication or suffering from any illness, that you think through what you're going to be doing, and consider whether what you're thinking of taking would not combine well with either your medication or your health. For example, if you have a history of stroke or a history of heart attack, you wouldn't want to smoke DMT or 5-methoxy DMT, because they both really increase heart rate and blood pressure and can cause problems if you've got heart disease or cerebrovascular disease. So that's an example of medical stuff with respect to tripping. If the possibility of adverse effects. Psychologically, adverse effects are the ones which occur, within the mind, primarily. Terence McKenna used to say, you can never die from, psychedelics physically, but you could from astonishment. You could die from astonishment. And you can, go crazy from astonishment, develop panic attacks as a result thereof. So I think you could divide adverse effects into acute, short-term, and long-term, and mild, medium, and severe. So like any other medical side effect, like penicillin, skin rashes, or diarrhea from certain drugs, high blood pressure. Most people experience some acute anxiety at some time during a psychedelic drug experience. And if it's intense, teeth grinding anxiety, or you break out in a cold sweat, you could call that brief, mild, to moderate episode of anxiety acutely. If you're, suicidal, let's say, in the middle of a trip, that would be more severe. If whatever was going on extended, let's say 24 or 48 hours after you've come down, then you would call that short term. And anything that goes on a week or so, you would consider to be long term.
This holiday season, you might be looking for nutritious, convenient meals to keep you energized on jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery service, can help you fuel up for brekkie, lunch, or dinner with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. They just drop them at your door, people. You'll save time and eat well. You'll stay on track with your healthy lifestyle while taking all of your holiday to-dos in stride with good meals in the tum-tum. If you're too busy with all this stuff, these meals are easy to get done. They taste great. All you've got to do is head over to factormeals.com/expandingreality50 and use code expandingreality50 to get 50% off. That's code expandingreality50 at factormeals.com/expandingreality50 to get 50% off.
You can have anxiety afterwards. You can have depression. You can have low energy. If you have a propensity to certain mental illnesses like mania or depression or schizophrenia, a big trip can trigger an episode, especially if it's an unpleasant experience. So it's a whole, spectrum of effects, from just brief, short-term immediate anxiety at some point during the trip or, prolonged psychosis. So it just depends.
What about set and setting? We talked about it a second ago with trip sitters, with these environments and these places. Like, let's say you can have a dispensary and then enjoy there. I like that. Kind of like a big discovery zone for adults, right? Like a ball pit and nice and colorful and cool music and all that stuff. So talk to us about set and setting and why is it important?
Well, set is who you are, your mental state, your physical state, your previous experience with altered states of consciousness, including those brought on, by psychedelics. And I think most important, it's your intention, why you want a trip. Is it for fun? Is it for introspection? Is it for enjoying, places of indoor or outdoor beauty? Is it, to interact with people therapeutically or, socially? So the intention is really important, part of the set. And I think it's important to spend some time working on your intention and clarifying it, setting things up so you can work on it when you're tripping as well. Setting is everything else external. It's the environment, indoor, outdoor. It's also, the set of the people in your immediate vicinity. Are they friends? Are they strangers? They people that are studying you, or are you studying them? Is it a research kind of setting? Morning, evening, nighttime. So there's 3 legs to any psychedelic experience. There's the set and the setting and the drug. So the drug would, be the specific, drug. Are you interested in, let's say, something solitary and short-term, which would be one of the smokable tryptamines, or, like a long haul with LSD. If it's going to be ibogaine, you need to be in a clinic in order to minimize any medical problems. So it's the set and the setting and the drug and the dose of the drug. If you want a small trip, take a smaller dose. If you're inexperienced, want to just kind of try it out. If you want a more intense trip, you would take you take a larger dose. It's just, so that's kind of the tripod. The set and the setting and the substance, including the dose.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about some psychedelics and how they're used, and then let's talk about how effective they are. So what's some of that? So just some psychedelics, like how are they used? Like what's one of the ways in which psychedelics are important and useful?
Well, medically is where most of the attention is going these days. And there's quite strong evidence of benefit in depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, tobacco and alcohol abuse, end of life despair. Those are the main conditions for which we've got some good rigorous data. There's quite a few other potential indications, but they haven't really been studied in a double-blind, placebo-controlled manner. There is just a study using LSD for anxiety as well. It came out a few months ago, and like all the other studies out there indicated some benefit.
It's incredible. Okay, so you have a section in your book. If you don't mind, I'd just like for you to talk to us about it. Medieval metaphysics.
Oh yeah,
man, that's cool. If you don't mind, sir.
Well, it's pretty deep into the woods and into the weeds, and I do tell people, please skip over if your eyes start to cross. Well, it's one of the models of the mind that I use to explain how psychedelics work, what they do. I've got one chapter in there which discusses the biology, the pharmacology, the brain functional imaging. All of that is, it's objective data. You could look at it, other people can look at it. The next chapter describing mechanism of action approaches things psychologically. So I introduce the three models that I'm most familiar with respect to the mind, how it works, and what psychedelics could be doing. One of those is the Freudian unconscious, subconscious, ego, id, superego model. The other is Buddhist Abhidharma psychology, which breaks mental experience down into a number of manageable categories, and you could speculate or hypothesize that psychedelics are modifying the function of those interacting mental mechanisms. And the third one is medieval metaphysics. And I got into that while I was working on my book on prophetic states, DMT and the soul of prophecy, which came out in 2014. So this is a model that harkens back to Aristotle of the Greeks a long, long, long time ago, which was then translated by the Muslim philosophers into Arabic, and then from Arabic into Hebrew. So the Jews learned about Aristotle through the Muslims, and this was in the 700s or so, and the 800s, the beginning of Arabic philosophical growth. And the Jewish medieval philosophers have got a system of how prophetic experience takes place, and prophecy is extremely psychedelic. If you look at descriptions of the accounts of the prophets, for example, chapter 1 of Ezekiel is completely psychedelic. There's angels with wings and eyes on the backs of the wings, and fire and ice, and falling down from weakness. So it's extremely psychedelic, and the philosophers worked out a way of understanding the visions that occur in the prophetic state, which are quite similar to the visions which occur in the psychedelic state. So their model is based on dividing the mind into the imaginative faculty or function and the rational or intellectual faculty or function. So the intellect is the location of and the place in which there's manipulating of ideas and concepts and notions. Mathematics, for example, the imagination is the location of everything else in mental experience. Your emotions, your sensations, your bodily awareness, even the meaningfulness or the reality nature of experience is determined or felt within the imagination. So it isn't imagination as made up or make believe. It's more the imagination as opposed to the intellect. So the intellect is where there's ideas, and the imagination is where there's experience, I suppose you could say, palpable, perceptible, apprehensible experience. So I think, anyway, that psychedelics stimulate the imagination much more than they do the intellect. Because, for example, in my study of DMT, people were able to really describe the novelty and the bizarreness of the DMT state in great detail. They could say it looked like this, it sounded like this, that there was this, I felt that. But if you compare those descriptions with what they got information-wise from the state, the information content was really quite ordinary. It was simply them working on themselves, like job issues, or they became more convinced of the paths of validity that their life was taking, or they were able to work through trauma. It was all quite personal, So the information within the prophetic state, at least as articulated in the Hebrew Bible, is the most important aspect of prophecy. People don't remember, Moses' visions, but remember the commandments and the golden rule and things like that. So the visions convey the most important part of the prophetic experience, which is the information. So at least in my book about prophetic states, I suggest that psychedelics primarily stimulate the imagination, and in order to get the most out of the stimulated imagination, you also need to work on the intellect at the same time. In other words, fill your mind with good ideas and good thoughts and good beliefs, like affirmations, spiritual affirmations, studying spiritual texts as well will develop the intellect, and you can gain some tools in extracting information from the imagination with intellectual sorts of tools that you've learned about through study. So basically, it's a way of encouraging people to live good lives and think good thoughts before they trip, in which case they'll get the most out of their experiences.
Absolutely. And whenever you're talking about prophecy and things like, I'm grateful you brought up Moses and the burning bush, because that's very psychedelic to me as well. Like you said, with the Ezekiel's will, and there's some kind of conjecture that it was an acacia bush that was burning, which is very prevalent to that area. But the whole thing is very interesting. And then I think of things like the Oracle of Delphi. Whenever she's tripping on these fumes off the mountain, then she's relaying these prophecies. But we just talked about how subjective the psychedelic experience is and how personal it is and how it's filtered through and it's very for you. So then you would ask, well, then how was any of the information relevant for anyone else if it was just personalized through the individual? And perhaps the answer to something like that would be all just speculation, is that they just psychedelics chose the right person, and maybe this is what prophets are. They're able to interpret it from a place of putting their subjectivity aside and making it a little bit more broad, or perhaps they'll be impacted by these big events as well, and that may be what it's being filtered through. But either way, I think it's interesting how people can have a psychedelic experience, relay it, and then a bunch of other people feel like it's going to occur for them, even though it was a very subjective way in which the message was received anyway. It's just all interpretational, man.
Yeah, it's interpretation and communication. And if you have a big vocabulary and understand things, more clearly as a result of the work you've already done, you can be more effective in expressing and communicating what you've gone through. It could be with art as well, but verbally you could write it down, you can talk about it. People can chew on it together.
That's the thing about these too. It's so difficult to articulate. And you've already brought it up here, but that's what's so interesting is that you can integrate, you feel it, and it sticks with you, but it's so hard to articulate. I always bring up that joke about this amazing, beautiful horse that's a painting, and then somebody says, my trip. And then the other, how I describe my trip picture is like a My Little Pony, like horribly duct taped to the end of a railing on stairs or something like that. So it falls so short of articulation. And these are experiences that need to be experienced, felt, and integrated in that way, which is so fascinating to me, man.
Well, I think we ought to at least try to use words. I mean, we can get closer and closer to the experience using words. We can't convey the feeling inside with words entirely, but you can approximate it. There's poetry, there's grammar, there's language. It is true to a certain extent that the psychedelic experience is sometimes what they call ineffable. It can't be described in words, but like you were saying with those paintings, you can't really describe anything in words. I mean, what can you describe in words? I guess mathematics, but every other part of existence is just an approximation. So even though the enormity of a psychedelic experience or its novelty kind of strains your vocabulary, that doesn't mean you should just say it's ineffable. I think we can work harder in that regard.
It's a great point. Yes, you might just be inarticulate. Maybe you thought about that. Good call. Okay, so I had a friend of mine. He's a phenomenal artist. He does the Value Added Project on Instagram named Josh Smith. He and I were chatting a little bit earlier, and both of us actually have this question for you. There's one I had for you anyway, but he was asking it intentionally, and so I would like to on his behalf as well. So what do you think about the idea that when you go to a psychedelic experience and you're in what's, unarguably a different realm, especially with the DMT experience, some ayahuascas as well, and if you take some heroic doses, you are in a different world. Our question to you is that a different world?
Well, it feels like a different world. And that may mean it is, or that may mean it just feels that way. So I think the jury is still out. I mean, I speculated toward the end of my DMT book about dark matter, parallel universes, those kinds of things. Whitley Strieber, the author of Communion, one of the first abduction books, Whitley and I, Whitley interviewed me. That was one of the earliest interviews after The Spirit Molecule came out. And, he was thinking that DMT allowed access to a completely different level of reality as well. So we just don't have the information. We just don't have the data. We don't have the instruments that could confirm or refute the idea that we are experiencing a different level of objective reality, like dark matter, for example. So we can't really prove it one way or the other. And that being the case, my feeling about about that is that if we can't really decide, or if we can't really determine it, it doesn't really matter that much. The more important thing is we live in this world most of the time. It has a system of cause and effect, which influences us and influences everything around us. So I think it's the information that we can glean from that state, rather than wondering if it's a real state or simply our brain on drugs. It's a subjective correlate of changed activity of the brain. I think our experiences ought to make us better people, ought to increase the chances of world peace. I think that's the most important thing. And at some point, we will figure out where those worlds reside. But in the meantime, there's a lot of work to be done.
Could not agree more, man. But you're out there doing the work, and we're right here with you, brother. So, and thank you for what you're doing for the movement, honestly. You're just doing an incredible, incredible job. Because whenever we talk about these altered states and this other world and these realms and these machine elves, that are reported quite often, and these different entities, physical, or maybe not physical, but they look physical to the people experiencing it, these beings that they are having interactions, insightful conversations with, and all of this stuff. Then my mind goes automatically to the U.S. government taking your work and research about intravenous sustained DMT trips and having soldiers, basically an underground bunker full of soldiers laying out in a room on these extended trips, out there communicating as either ambassadors or taking over these realms. That is just where my mind goes with it. Now, I would like something where we all hang out and we all can maybe go to these places and visit, if it was more of, like you said, an opportunity for an objective experience, something we could share.
Yeah, you aren't alone in your concerns. A few years ago, Alex Jones invited me, to be on his show, and I declined. And then a few months later, I heard that he was claiming that the elites were smoking DMT, and the aliens were telling them what to do. It's a possibility. I mean, my Zen teacher used to say it's always 51-49. 51% good, 49% bad, or evil, I think is the more potent term. It's up to us to keep things on the up and up.
Yeah, I kind of tend to view this thing as it's just like in Star Wars. You only experience what you take with you. And so I think the in-depthness of our psyche is really what's kind of being explored there. And it's something that not a lot of people are willing to do. They're fine with their Real Housewives of whatever and just baseline. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There's value in that, in this experience. But in my mind, it seems just a little bit extra. And it seems like you can really gain a lot of insight because people have done some amazing work on themselves, healing trauma, as you said, in those sites of those instances of extrasensory perception. Whenever we drop into those and you plant these little seeds of trauma out there, and then you come back to baseline when you're not tripping, well, something like an ayahuasca experience can offer you the opportunity to reach that hypersensitivity again, to be able to dig those things out and integrate them in a way that you weren't able to before. So I find it very valuable.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I think in the right hands, with the right intention, the right setting and dose, they can be extraordinarily helpful in ways that other things cannot. One of my volunteers, when he was coming out of his DMT trip, he said, "Oh, can't you get here with meditation?" And I laughed at him. I said, "Try it." Yeah, so the pharmacology is a lot more reliable, a lot more consistent. It takes you to places, which are very hard to get to otherwise.
Yeah. Instead of 30 years of meditation and Wim Hof breathing and to access that DMT you got in you to trip for like 1 second. I've done it. Just take the shortcut, man. Come experience it, and then you got more work to do here, so you don't have to invest all that time into the practice, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been thinking about the whole, enlightenment by psychedelic idea in spiritual traditions. A big enlightenment experience is just, confirmation that you're on the right path. It isn't like the reward or the goal or the accomplishment as much as the beginning of your real serious work. My Zen teacher used to say, once you've had your first enlightenment experience, that's when the work begins. So it isn't like you have a huge experience and you're done. It ought to be, or it is within a spiritual tradition that once you've had that experience, then is, when you're more committed and more involved with the path.
Yeah, that's the real dragon you're chasing. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, one final question for you, sir, and I'm truly grateful for your time here, Rick. This is amazing. So we'd mentioned McKenna earlier, his stoned ape theory out of his Food of the Gods book. What are your thoughts on it?
It's a great idea. Psilocybin increases visual acuity. It stimulates the growth of new neurons, stimulates the complexity of connections among neurons. If you're making sounds, you can hear sounds, and you can manipulate visions with the sounds you make, which is an interesting way of looking at the origin of speech as a communicative tool, and the development of language as kind of laying down speech more permanently. It's a good theory. I'm not an anthropologist. I don't know if there's any evidence to support it. It is clear there's a long history of psychedelic use in Africa, northern Africa at least, going back maybe 8,000, 7,000 years or so. Whether it goes back as far as the evolution of non-human primates into human primates, I can't really comment. It gets support from people, but I don't know how much support.
I think it's an unfalsifiable and provable. I just think that, even McKenna says this. It's just that man's brain doubled, and this is probably, he lays out a very plausible scenario. And so, it makes a lot of sense. But like you said, it's interesting, but I just think it's fun. I think it's a really, really interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, it is fun. It's something that you talk about when you're stoned.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so, whenever you're out in Texas, we'll take some mushrooms, we'll go sit down by the pond, and we can talk about all this stuff. That'd be a lot of fun, man. Well, Dr. Rick Strassman, I can't thank you enough. This has been incredible. You're, of course, welcome back any damn time. And just keep up the great work. The Psychedelic Handbook and all the ways to find him will be located down in the show notes. You guys make sure that you check it out. Thank you so much, man. This was awesome.
Great. Well, many thanks. Pleasure.
Just want to take a moment and thank Dr. Rick Strassman for coming by and hanging out with us. All of the ways to find him, as well as his new book, The Psychedelic Handbook, will be located down in the show notes. Make sure that y'all check that out. Also, in the show description, check out our resource links. We have Food Forest Abundance, Get Your Freedom from Fear On, Opus, the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support. If you are interested in starting your own podcast, there is a link down there that reads Start Your Own Podcast, and that's a damn good place to start. Also, if you really want to step your game up in life in general, the Manifestor's Guy, Dewey Taylor, has a special scholarship offer for you, the listener of this right here. And at checkout, if you type in Expanding Reality, all caps, no spaces, he sweetens the deal even more. So definitely check that out if that's something that you're into. All right, also stay tuned after this, guys. My announcement at the beginning of the show here, documentary that I'm in, Darcy Weir's new one, Secret Space UFOs, NASA's First Missions. We're going to play the trailer right after this, so you guys stay tuned. It's unbelievable, incredibly cool opportunity. Darcy, I love you, man. This is a badass experience and incredibly cool film. It's his best one yet. I've been a fan of Darcy's for a long time, and I'm not biased because I'm in this. I would have said it if I wouldn't. This is an awesome, awesome doc, and he did a wonderful job. So stay tuned for that trailer. Link is in the description if you guys want to check it out. It's over on Amazon, so just go check it out. All right, guys, go out into this magically beautiful, mysterious place, whatever the hell this thing is, and y'all pick up a piece of litter. Get right with yourself and make sure that you have your garden tended. That's where you start, and then maybe look around at everything else. Just kind of want to throw that in there. Also, while you guys are doing that, buy somebody in line around you a coffee or a meal. Something very, very small goes a massively far way. And, of course, get out of the left-hand lane. You got somebody behind you wanting to pass. that is an incredibly amazing way to instantly change the vibe on this place, is just by being mindful of things like that. And so that's why I say it. Plus, it's a huge pet peeve of mine. So I'm working on everybody getting out of the left-hand lane. You got somebody behind you wanting to pass there. Okay, and also, above all and anything else, guys, go out into this incredibly amazing place, whatever the hell this thing is, and y'all just be good to one another. Thank you so much for listening, for watching, for engaging, and just being the coolest sons of bitches ever. We'll see you next time.
A lifetime of hard work, children laughing in the kitchen, family photos on a restaurant wall, a legacy that lives on. It all comes from the power of a conversation, like the one Tommy Hall had with First Horizon Bank about taking over his father's Charleston-based restaurant business. Now the table is set for a whole new generation. First Horizon Bank. Let's find a way. Go to firsthorizon.com/Tommy. First Horizon Bank, member FDIC.